So I will start with a video that you just saw now, with the story of Fahime, which is only one of the many examples that illustrates women's rights organization frontline role in humanitarian response. Fahime is part of an organization that we work with in Gaza. It's called CFTA, and then CFTA has community centers. So when people were forcibly displaced from the north to the south, they opened these community centers in order to host IDPs. However, during the ground invasion, even these community centers were destructed. So they rented the land, and now they're hosting more than 1,500 IDPs in tented camps. So this shows us how women's rights organizations are at the front line in order to respond to the emergency response, adapting and working even with minimal resources, risking their own lives to realize their agenda as humanitarian workers. As the world today celebrates International Women's Day, the war in Gaza continues, driven by the protracted Israeli occupation, as was mentioned by Mitri before, and 16 years of blockade on Gaza and recurrent hostilities. This affects everyone in Palestine, but unfortunately it has an adverse effect on women and girls, impacting gender equality in the occupied Palestinian territory. Because in OPT, we always say that women face double jeopardy. One, resulting from the protracted Israeli occupation, and second, from the harmful social norms and structural inequalities that affect also them. So I guess that Mitri gave a very comprehensive overview of what's happening in terms of the gender aspect. So I will be very brief in terms of giving a snapshot about how what's happening in Palestine now is very gendered, and it's a war on women. So more than 30,000 people have been killed. Of course, this number is underestimated because so many people are unaccounted for under the rubble, unfortunately. 70% from them are being women and children. The ongoing war claims an average of 63 women daily, leaving families shattered and children vulnerable. As was mentioned by Mitri, that every hour, 2 mothers are being killed. So today, in our event, which is 4 hours, in total, 8 mothers will be killed, which is a huge number. This dire reality unfolds as Gaza majority face displacement, and you can imagine how displacement and overcrowded shelters mean to women, lack of privacy, lack of protection, and how menstruation can be catastrophic. The closure of the 2 shelters that was working with gender-based violence in Gaza also intensify the threat faced by women and girls. Rates of gender-based violence pre-war was alarming. It was 7 in 10 women experiencing violence. And from our experiences from pre-escalations, we know that this number will also increase. Adding to this ambush, many women have lost their family breadwinners with very limited income-generating opportunities, and now women-headed households have to provide to their families, intensifying the risk of negative coping mechanisms such as child labor and early marriages. Amidst all of this crisis, women find themselves have to provide for the caregivers, providing psychological support, emotional support to the family members, taking care of the elderly, of people with disabilities, and with the absence of mental health and protection services, it leaves women in stressful and traumatic situation. And then if you want to tackle also women with diversity, women with disabilities, just the situation is catastrophic. Last week we were working with some women with disabilities in Gaza, and one of them told us that how her dream is reclaiming her wheelchair that she lost with displacement. But then she was thinking that even if she has her wheelchair now, how she could navigate the streets that is filled with rubbles in Gaza. So in addition to that, there is a looming famine in Gaza affecting everybody, but very specific of women, pregnant and breastfeeding women, as 90% of them are at risk of malnutrition and undernutrition. More than 180 pregnant women delivers daily under catastrophic situation. We're working with pregnant women in shelters as Oxfam, and we know that many of them went through C-section without anesthetic. Women cannot breastfeed because of the stress, and then because of lack of access to water, to clean water in order to prepare infant formula. The situation in the West Bank mirrors this tragedy, where in 2023, it was described by the UN as the deadliest year, with high casualties, night raids, arbitrary detentions, infrastructure destructions, and movement restrictions that plagued the West Bank. Violence escalates both by the Israeli soldiers and then by settler violence, resulting in death, injuries, armed demolition, displacing families across the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And then with the multiple checkpoints that Mitri was talking about, we witnessed women giving birth at checkpoint due to the lack of movement and restriction of movement. We witnessed that several instances of sexual harassment at checkpoint. And then, of course, all of this situation has repercussion and social relation and increased instances of violence against women. So if this is not a war against women, and if this is not a women's issue, then what it is? Speaking with colleagues in Gaza, of course, as I mentioned, this is just a snapshot. The magnified stories are horrific. For every square mile in Gaza, multiple tragedies are happening, affecting everyone, specifically women, girls. So conflict and war is not gender neutral. So amid this catastrophic situation, what women leaders and women rights organizations can do. So in Gaza, also, the majority of women rights organizations have also been displaced, making access to communication and work materials challenging, securing threats of movement, restrict and limit women rights organization ability to implement activities and reach target groups safely and consistently. However, amid all of these challenges, 10 out of 12 women rights organizations in the Gaza Strip reported being operational. As Oxfam, we work with 6 women's rights organizations in Gaza and 10 in the West Bank. And on a daily basis, we're in awe and then we're impressed by their level of organization and outreach to the community and how they're even being able to work amid this catastrophic situation. So, as I mentioned, they open their safe spaces as shelters to IDPs. They're providing emergency items, mental health, psychosocial support, and responding to protection concerns. The work is done by women leaders who are leaving their families and extended families behind. Speaking to a women leader last week, she told me that every time she heads to the field, her family bids her farewell with prayers and cautionary advice, fearing from the unstopped bombing and that she might not be able to go back to them. We witnessed while working with WRO is that how they have built strong community ties and trust and providing access to vulnerable women and girls for support services. Due to their proximity to the communities and vulnerable population, they were able to reach and respond more rapidly, and they are relying on social capital and networks to reach other women and provide solidarity and support. Working with women rights organizations in Gaza and the West Bank, I will just give a brief of what we're able to do. They are documenting the gender impact of occupation, and we know that this is important in order to break the culture of impunity. In the north of Gaza, where you know that shelters in the north were left without anything, women's rights organization started a midwifery program where they trained midwives and supported them with kits. And under this program now, we have more than 40 babies that were born safely under such a program. In the West Bank, they supported Gaza people who weren't able to go back due to the war with cash, food, psychosocial support, etc. And of course, it's just a brief of the massive work that they have been doing since October up till now. Yet, amid all of these challenges and achievements of women rights organizations, before the current escalations and hostilities, only 3 national local women rights organizations received funding directly through humanitarian response plans. This shows how inaccessible international humanitarian spaces and funding streams are for the women rights organizations, despite being able to work and being at the front line at humanitarian responses. Moreover, in a recent gender alert that analyzed the funding for flash appeal for 2023 for the humanitarian response, it showed only that 0.09% of fund went to women's rights organizations. This needs to change. This needs to stop. The under-recognition of women's rights organizations is rooted in patriarchal norms, sidelining women as active community leaders and perpetuating gender biases in humanitarian responses. Women rights organizations find representation primarily in gender-specific sectors, which are important, like protection, like gender-based violence, but they are not enough because they're excluded from other critical humanitarian domains. And this also needs to stop and needs to change. So why what's happening now needs to be addressed as a women's rights issue? Because ensuring women meaningful leadership is crucial because they can tackle the multiple level of oppression that I was speaking about and putting it at the forefront and advocating for an increased representation, decision-making processes when it comes to humanitarian response and beyond. And then for government, INGOs, UN agencies, and donors, we have committed to empower women's rights organizations in humanitarian action under so many frameworks, but namely the UN Security Council Resolution 1325. Despite criticism, because I totally agree with what was mentioned by Mitri, that the resolution failed completely in terms of providing any meaningful protection and meaningful participation for women in a humanitarian context. And this has so many reasons due to the colonial heritage, due to the geopolitical reasons among the different members of the Security Council, because instead of challenging power imbalances and addressing root causes of conflict, the resolution, unfortunately, to a large extent, have been absorbed into calls for integrating women into existing structure of peace and security without challenging the underlying factors of violence and conflict. However, it's essential to remind ourselves of the transformative potential inherent in the resolution and in the subsequent national action plans, as it has the potential to offer comprehensive understanding of women's roles and experiences in armed conflicts, and potentially serve as a vehicle to unite efforts in prioritizing women's rights, which shouldn't be neglected or relegated as back burner and not a priority in humanitarian settings. And this is now a concern for the women's rights movement, that women's rights movement and women's rights issues need to be at the forefront and not to be seen as a second priority amid the humanitarian crisis that's happening in Gaza and the West Bank. So there's a space now that can be harnessed in order to bring a more focus on OPT and foster more meaningful engagement, placing women's rights organizations and voices from the grassroots at the forefront, and of course, breaking the impunity of the IHL violations. Before I close, I want to highlight that speaking with WROs in Gaza about their priorities, they said that the right of life is crucial because if this is violated, then nothing else matters. So I just want to reiterate that a permanent ceasefire is the single most important humanitarian response that Gaza needs now. Of course, it will be followed by humanitarian aid that must be allowed to flow in safety to those people most in need. I just want to close by saying that women and girls in Palestine are not victims. They are hopeful, skillful, and working to lead a better future, whether in education, health, economy, and mobilizing gender equality. Women and girls are impelling themselves as leaders, advocates, and change makers. That's why we need to call for the Palestinian voices of women to be included. Now, of course, we're focusing on permanent ceasefire, but then after that, the reconstruction efforts and to call for an end of the occupation. Thank you.